A lot has been said about the MG5, particularly with regards to its performance or lack thereof in certain areas. However, MG insists that there are qualities to this car that we may have overlooked. And so in order to highlight them, they've brought us out all the way to Desaru to find out. My name is AIMAN ABDULLAH, this is Malaysian Motoring, this is our preview drive of the all-new MG5. Now, a quick refresher on the MG5. This is what they consider to be their B+ segment competitor, with prices putting it broadly up against the Honda City and the Toyota Vios. Up front, there is a 1.5-litre naturally aspirated engine producing some degree of power and about 150 Newton meters of torque, with the power going to the front wheels via an 8-speed CVT. Now, in terms of dimensions, there's a reason why this is being referred to as a B+ competitor, because in terms of size, it is broadly similar, or in fact more similar to what you get from the Toyota Corolla as well as the Honda Civic. However, again, in terms of pricing as well as under the bonnet performance, it is more in line with what you get from the B segment, which is why MG is positioning this car in a segment lower. That also means that this car enjoys a significantly longer wheelbase than other B segment competitors. Now, this benefits in a couple of ways. Firstly, in terms of dynamics, and secondly, in terms of interior space, as we will demonstrate shortly. But in terms of standard specification, on paper at least, this car is still relatively generously specified. You get LED headlights up front, you get that 3D digital burning grille, if you buy into that or not. There are 17-inch alloy wheels wrapped in Maxxis tires, which are middle of the road. You get keyless entry and go, you get this lovely chrome strip, as well as a sunroof, which is, if I'm not mistaken, the most affordable car to offer a sunroof in the country, if I'm not mistaken. You also get that coupe-like roofline, which they are very proud of, something that they say harks back to MG's motorsports heritage, which is why this car has a particularly dynamic look. Same goes for this double waistline effect, apparently. But as a result of this car being bigger, it does mean that it does offer a little bit more practicality compared to other B segment competitors, and so that is certainly something that it has going for it. Now, that sloping roofline resolves itself quite nicely with this integrated ducktail spoiler, which I think does make this car look quite good. You also get a set of partial LED tail lights, where you have LED brake lights and positioning lights, but the bulb and indicator the indicator and reverse lights are still bulb. And you also get a fake rear diffuser and fake exhaust exits back here in order to make the car look a little bit more dynamic, although there is a very real rear fog light. Now, because this is a much larger car than other B segment competitors, as I mentioned earlier, it does pay dividends in terms of practicality, because behind this boot lid you will find a good amount of space. This is significantly larger, again, compared to the Honda City and the Toyota Vios, which means that this is ultimately a more practical machine. On top of that, the rear seats can be folded as a single piece in order to make more room for larger items should you need to, which does make this a very versatile space no matter how you slice it. Of course, underneath the boot floor, you will not find a spare tyre. Instead, there is a tyre repair kit as well as some emergency tools should you need it, but if you do have a flat, call your insurance company. Now, as far as I'm concerned, I think that in terms of the design, the MG5 is not that bad looking. It's just that the 17-inch alloy wheels are a little bit disappointing, because I would have preferred them to be 18s, especially on a car like this, but overall, again, for the money, it doesn't seem that bad. And that sentiment of not bad continues into the cabin, because at first glance it does seem like a pretty generous offering, again, for the money. There are lots of different textures and materials within this car in order to draw the eye all over this cabin. It's just little things, for example, like this sort of brushed look here, as well as this sort of pixel-like parametric geometric patterny thingy going on up here, as well as the use of more pattern material here, and the choice of upholstery colors that again sort of uplift this cabin and make it feel like it's worth more than it is. These are all very good things if you ask me. The same goes, for example, for the dashboard architecture, because the center stack, for example, is tilted ever so slightly towards the driver as a clear indication of its driver-focused nature, which is not something that you see very often within this segment, so that is certainly very good. And the same goes for the steering wheel, for example, which is surprisingly chunky, and the design itself does appear to mimic more expensive cars, which is nice to see, again, for something that is currently sub 90,000 ringgit. Now, talking about the screens, you have a central touchscreen here which controls the majority of the car's functions as well as your multimedia system. This also comes with Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, although it is a wired system, which means you need one of these. Now, in terms of the response time of the screen, it is not bad in terms of that processing speed and stuff like that, but I will admit that the fact that it is a wired connection is a little bit of a detraction, because not only does it require you or necessitate you to use a wire, it also doesn't really do much to charge your phone because it uses a USB-A port, and the amount of power that goes through that is relatively limited. The other irritating thing is, although there are a bank of physical buttons here, unfortunately the HVAC controls live within the screen. And so if you have Android Auto going, for example, you want to adjust the temperature, you have to press a button here and then change your air conditioning settings. And then when you're done from that, you have to go into the home screen and then re-trigger Android Auto rather than being able to self-cancel using the same button. On top of that, this car doesn't come with climate control, it only comes with air conditioning. Digital, albeit, but it's air conditioning, which means you will most likely be manipulating the screen a little bit more often in order to get comfortable within the car. That is, to me, a little bit of a software oversight, but SAIC and MG Malaysia have said that they will try to continue to refine this system as time goes along. Now, accompanying this screen is the digital instrument cluster up ahead. Now, this is not a fully digital cluster because the screen itself is relatively small, although there are more digital readouts on either side for, your speed and RPM and stuff like that. And this, to me, looks like a better implementation of this sort of digital instrument cluster within the segment compared to the Toyota Vios, simply because it doesn't look like it's a half and half type affair. And I do think it's also a better implementation than what we've seen from the Honda City in terms of the hybrid setup, where you have half a screen on one side and then a dial on the other. Because there's something about this that just feels a little bit more engaging, and it is also relatively easy for you to get all the information that you want at a glance. Now, beyond that, again, you have that steering wheel that I mentioned earlier with its perforations and contrast stitching, which I think is very nice to look at, very nice to hold. You've got physical buttons up here, which feel quite nice to use, and they're also very large, so it's easy for your finger to find them when you're driving along. Now, as you move further back, that's when you find the two USB-A ports up front as well as a 12-volt socket. Your electronic parking brake lives here. You've got a surprisingly traditional gear selector for a Chinese car. You also get a cubby hole on this side, not on this, and you have a decently sized center console. Now, I say decent because it's not the deepest thing in the world, but because this car does have rear air conditioning vents, I understand that this had to be made a little bit shallower in order to make way for the channel of air from the front to the rear. In terms of practicality, you get a couple of cup holders here, decently sized door bins, as well as a decently sized glove box. And you also get an electrically adjustable driver's seat, which is also quite rare within the B segment, although the passenger seat remains manual no matter what. And as far as I'm concerned, it does feel that in terms of appointments, the front half of this cabin is pretty good. You also get that sunroof that I mentioned earlier. And so to me, it just feels decently equipped, again, for the money. What's slightly less decent is the space back here, but please understand the point I'm trying to make here. With the front seat set in my driving position about 170 centimeters, as you can see, I have a good amount of knee room and a pretty decent amount of headroom despite that sloping roofline. This is easily among the best within the B segment because there is a good amount of space back here for adults, even behind, again, reasonably sized adults in the front. And of course, I can tuck my feet in underneath the seat in front of me, and as you can see, I have a pretty good amount of under-thigh support. Again, this is not really the norm within the B segment, and so this is very noteworthy indeed. And of course, beyond space, in terms of practicality, the back half of this cabin is pretty well appointed too. You get a little cubby hole here, a USB-A port, as well as pockets behind the seats, as well as decently sized door bins, big enough for a 1.5 litre size bottle. There are only a couple of things about the back half of this cabin that I'm not really a big fan of. Firstly, you get a crotch cooler, but only one. Although the vent itself is of a normal size, there is only one direction or one vent here, which means that if you have multiple passengers back here, you're probably going to be fighting for cold air. And while you may have noticed I mentioned bottle holders, I haven't mentioned cup holders because there aren't any. And that highlights one of the other things I can't stand about this car, because there is no center armrest. Now, I did sit in the back of this car on my drive down to Desaru yesterday in order to test the NVH and comfort levels and stuff like that. And I will admit that not having a center armrest was very, very noticeable for me. This car would have been immeasurably improved by offering a fold-down center armrest with a couple of cup holders, because that would have been nice. Now, if you're not looking to move adults in the back of this car, you will be very grateful for the fact there are obviously ISOFIX mounts on the two outer seats. And because this car has a relatively long wheelbase, it means that even a bulky rear-facing child seat shouldn't be too much of an issue. These doors also open relatively wide in order to allow for those seats to move in and out. And so all of this works together to make the MG5 a surprisingly practical car. Pretty decent for the money. However, many questions have been raised about this car's performance. Like I mentioned at the very beginning of this video, the fact that this car comes with a 1.5 litre naturally aspirated engine does appear as if the design of this car is writing checks that the powertrain cannot cash. However, MG is insistent that because this is a B segment competitor, it does have a B segment powertrain. And they claim that there is no detriment to going in this route or with this route for the MG5. So let's get back in the driver's seat and see if they're right. So after having driven the MG5 almost 900 kilometers from Kuala Lumpur all the way to Desaru and back, it's a surprisingly complex car to summarize, because of course on paper it's easy to shoehorn this car into certain segments and make certain assumptions, but what this drive has helped reveal is that you need better tires, but more importantly that the MG5 does have some qualities about it that make it a more appealing vehicle. So firstly, if you do buy one, please swap out these Maxxis tires, because as you can hear, the NVH level in this car is highly dependent on the road surface because these tires are a bit naff. Now, beyond that, the few things that have stuck out to me about this car is firstly the fact that it's so spacious. As I demonstrated earlier, the extended wheelbase of this car compared to other B segment saloons means that you do have more room to stretch out. And even in the front seats, you do have a decent amount of side support, although I would have appreciated a little bit more lower thigh support. This car also comes with a lumbar function, which is again not something that you generally find within the B segment. In fact, you struggle to find it even within C segment vehicles. And so that to me speaks a lot about the value that's being put forward in the MG5. Next comes the refinement, where when you're not on the world's coarsest surface as we are right now, this car is surprisingly quiet. Even at speeds north of the national speed limit, this car remains surprisingly composed and muted, so much so that even I could fall asleep in the car, and I'm notorious for not being able to sleep in moving vehicles. So again, that speaks to just how refined this car is. And then there's the powertrain. So as I mentioned earlier, this car's got a 1.5 litre naturally aspirated engine mated to a CVT automatic gearbox with 8 simulated gears. Fine, whatever. Now, if you were to compare this to other vehicles within this price category, it is broadly on par with what Toyota offers in the Vios, as well as what Honda offers in the City, but of course it is eclipsed by what Proton offers in the S70 if you want to consider that a B segment contender. So generally it's par for the course. Now, because this is an MG, we don't really have much history with this car or with this brand in terms of how we can expect performance to be. So on paper, the numbers are reasonable, and performance in this car is also reasonable. 0 to 100 is completed in actually a little bit north of 11 seconds, which does make this a little bit slow, but it is well within reason for a car in this category. But what truly blew me away was actually the fuel economy. So driving on the motorway, naturally we're driving at higher speeds, and every once in a while we have to slightly exceed the speed limit in order to overtake smoothly. And despite that, and the changing geography and topography from between KL and Desaru, this car is still reporting a really healthy 7.7 liters per 100 kilometers. This is a little bit far off the claim of 5 and a bit liters that MG puts out, but as far as I'm concerned, this is still an excellent figure nonetheless. And of course, if driven about in town, this figure should improve slightly on the basis that you're not driving it at very high speeds. So it seems very clear to me that MG has tried very hard to ensure that the MG5 presents a well-rounded package. However, there is a fly in the ointment in terms of safety. Now, yes, this car does not come with AEB or adaptive cruise control or intelligent cruise control, which is what Proton offers, which does mean that it is at a slight disadvantage compared to not just the Japanese competitors, but also the single Malaysian competitor within this space. But what MG is trying to communicate is that with the MG5, it is about the freedom of choice and the freedom of expression. That's why this car is available in such bright, loud colors, which is not something that you usually find within the B segment, where buyers will usually opt for slightly more toned down, more conservative color options. For MG, the MG5 is about dynamic individuality. And to that end, I do think that this car does offer some degree of dynamic prowess that the other competitors don't really offer. Now, bear in mind that I have said on record that the S70 is not really dynamic, whereas the Toyota Vios is. So it would be interesting to compare this to the Vios, and I think that also demarcates kind of where buyer habits are going to be. If you want a car that drives a little bit better, you may prefer the Toyota Vios. If you want something with a little bit more power, especially for motorway cruising, you may prefer the S70. But if you want to be sat somewhere in the middle, then that's what this is. It's sat in the middle. In terms of both practicality, driver appeal, packaging, it's there. And on top of that, MG has also been very competitive in terms of offering a very comprehensive warranty on this car, which is class leading for the B segment. And as a result, it does imbue a certain degree of confidence if you were to opt for something like an MG5. Now, there are many more things to talk about when it comes to this car. There are many more things for us to test, but ultimately this is a preview drive. We haven't really had that much time in it. And so I'll reserve further comments and theories about the MG5 for a full review video that will come later. But in any case, that concludes our preview drive of the all-new MG5. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, hit the little bell icon to be notified every time we make a new upload. Don't forget to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and you can join our new WhatsApp channel. All the links are in the description below. Thank you so much for watching. We will catch you in the next one. Take care and stay safe.